Please like, share, and subscribe. Wishing you happiness and good luck every day.
So what if everything you thought you knew about money was just wrong? That's the big question at the center of the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. The author, Robert Kiyosaki, basically grew up with two dads. One followed all the rules, but always struggled with money. The other, well, he broke the rules and ended up building an empire. And their totally different lessons forced him to choose his own way. And this right here, this is the core of it all. It's the fundamental choice the book lays out for us. Do you want to work for a company, or do you want to learn how to buy one? One path seems safe and secure, but the other offers a shot at real freedom. These aren't just career tips. They're two completely different blueprints for your financial life. So who were these guys? Well, Poor Dad was actually Kiyosaki's real father, a super educated guy, a public official with a PhD. And Rich Dad? That was his best friend's father, a guy who dropped out in the 8th grade but was busy building a business empire. Talk about a contrast. And their ideas about money weren't just a little different. I mean, they were at war. One dad would say the love of money is the root of all evil. The other would fire back, no, the lack of money is the root of all evil. Imagine being a kid trying to figure that out, right? Kiyosaki knew he had to pick a side, choose which voice he was going to listen to. So what kicked this whole thing off? Well, it all started with a bit of childhood pain. A 9-year-old Robert got left out by some wealthy friends because he was the poor kid. So he went home and asked his dad, "How do I get rich?" His dad, the highly educated one, well, he didn't have an answer. He just said, "Use your head, son." And since his own dad couldn't teach him, he did something pretty amazing. He sent Robert to learn from someone who could, his best friend's dad, the entrepreneur. And Rich Dad's first lesson wasn't about getting rich. It was about understanding the trap that keeps most people poor. He called it the rat race. So what is the rat race? Rich Dad's take was that it's this endless loop. Get up, go to work, pay the bills, repeat. But it's not just about the money. That's the key. It's emotional. The fear of not having money is what gets you out of bed to go to a job you might hate. And then the desire for all the nice stuff makes you spend everything you earn. Fear and greed, that's what keeps the wheel spinning. And it's a cycle that just gets handed down generation to generation. You know the drill. Get a safe job, earn some money, buy the house, the car. Then what? Well, to afford more stuff, you got to work even harder, get a raise, and you just end up buying more things. Your paycheck gets bigger, but so do your bills. You're running faster and faster, but you're not actually going anywhere. Okay, so how do you break the cycle? How do you get off this treadmill? Well, Rich Dad's first lesson was a little weird. Definitely not what you'd expect. He gave the boys a job, not to teach them how to be good little workers, but to teach them to think about work in a completely different way. He paid them a measly 10 cents an hour. Can you imagine? Dusting canned goods for practically nothing. After a few weeks of this, Robert was fed up. He was angry. He felt used. He was ready to walk. And that's exactly what Rich Dad was waiting for. When Robert finally blew up and confronted him, Rich Dad dropped this piece of wisdom. He explained that life is always pushing you around. Most people just take it. They let life push them. But the smart ones, the ones who get ahead, they stop and ask, "Okay, life, what's the lesson here? What are you trying to teach me?" And then came the real curveball. Rich Dad said, "Okay, now you're going to keep working for free." He took away their 10 cents an hour. The whole point was to force their brains to stop thinking about a paycheck and start seeing opportunities to make money that were invisible to everyone else. And that's when it all clicked. This is the big takeaway right here. The poor and the middle class work for money. They are driven by that fear of not having enough. But the rich flip that whole idea on its head. They learn how to make money work for them. Okay, so how do you actually do that? How do you make your money work for you? Rich Dad said it all boils down to one single, super important rule. If you master this one thing, you get the foundation of how to build wealth. So, what is it? What's this one rule that changes the whole game? It's not some crazy, complex financial formula. Nope. It's just about understanding the huge difference between two simple words. First up, an asset. Forget all the complicated definitions you've heard before. Rich Dad's definition is just dead simple. It's all about which way the money is flowing. An asset is anything that puts money in your pocket. And a liability? You guessed it. It's the exact opposite. It's anything that takes money out of your pocket. That's it. In or out. Simple as that. The direction of the cash flow is the only thing that matters. And this is where he really shakes things up. This is the idea that gets everybody talking. See, Poor Dad always said, our house is our biggest asset. It's what most of us are taught. But Rich Dad, he said, no, my house is a liability. Why? Because every single month, it's taking money out of your pocket for the mortgage, for taxes, for repairs. Once you get that key difference, you can literally see the financial blueprint for each class of people. And get this, it has way less to do with how much money you make and everything to do with where that money goes. Let's start with the poor. It's a really simple pattern. Money comes in from a job, and it goes right back out to pay for the basics: rent, food, taxes. There's nothing left over to buy things that make you more money, so the cycle just continues. Now, the middle class is a little more complicated, but honestly, the result isn't that different. A bigger paycheck comes in, sure, but where does it go? Straight out the door to pay for liabilities that they think are assets. You know, the mortgage, the car payment, the credit card bills. They look like they have more, but their cash is still flowing away from them. But the rich, they are playing a totally different game. Here's what they do. They use their money to buy assets first. Things like rental properties, businesses, stocks, stuff that generates its own income. Then, the money from those assets pays for their lifestyle. And whatever's left over, it goes right back into buying even more assets. It's a beautiful, powerful cycle that just keeps growing and growing. And this really shows why financial smarts are so much more important than just having a big salary. It's why you hear about lottery winners or pro athletes going bankrupt, right? They suddenly get a ton of cash, but they're still using that poor or middle-class blueprint. They just buy bigger liabilities. It's not about what you earn, it's about what you keep and what you do with it. So this whole thing really leaves you with one big question to ask yourself, a really important one. Take a look at your own life, your own finances. Is your money working for you, or are you just working for it? Are you stuck on that treadmill in the rat race, or are you building your own path to freedom? Because according to Rich Dad, that choice, it's always yours to make. You ever stop and wonder why some people just seem to get rich, while other people who work just as hard, if not harder, stay stuck? Well, Robert Kiyosaki's famous book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, has a pretty radical answer. It all comes down to a simple idea. The rich teach their kids a whole different set of rules about money, rules the rest of us never hear about. So let's dive in and unpack exactly what those rules are. Study hard, get good grades, and you'll find a great, high-paying job with awesome benefits. I mean, come on. Does that sound familiar? I bet it does. It's the classic advice, right? It's the path to success that's been drilled into us for generations. The promise is so simple. Just follow the plan and you'll be set for life. But here's the thing. The book kicks off with a really provocative question. What if that's the single most dangerous piece of advice you could possibly give a kid today? The whole argument is that this old playbook isn't just a little outdated, it might actually be setting people up for a lifetime of financial struggle. So what's the deal? Why is this advice, which used to be golden, so broken now? Well, the book's answer is pretty straightforward. The world has changed, and I mean dramatically changed. But the financial advice we're all getting hasn't. Seriously, think about it for a second. The whole idea of lifetime employment with one company, getting a guaranteed pension, total job security, those things are basically relics of the past. It's kind of like we're trying to navigate a brand new, high-tech city using a map from like 100 years ago. The world is completely different, but we're still using the same old instructions. And you can see how the old rules are failing all over the place. Getting straight A's isn't a golden ticket to success anymore. That safe, secure job we were all promised, it's pretty much a myth in an age where companies are constantly downsizing. And, planning to rely on a company pension or even Social Security for your retirement, that's a huge gamble these days. Okay, so this leads us to one of the book's most famous ideas, this trap that the old advice leads people right into. And he calls it the rat race. So what is the rat race? It's basically this endless loop. You get a job, you start making more money, and what happens? Your lifestyle gets bigger to match. You get a bigger house, a nicer car, you have more expenses. You end up on this hamster wheel, running faster and faster, but you're not actually going anywhere. You're just stuck. And here's exactly how that cycle works. It starts with getting that safe job. Then, as your income goes up, so does your spending. So to cover all those new costs, you've got to work even harder to get promotions and raises, which just means you're paying more in taxes and getting into more debt. And here's the real kicker. The final step, you turn around and pass that exact same advice onto your own kids, locking the whole cycle in for another generation.
So the big question is, how do you break out of this cycle? Well, according to the book, it all starts with understanding two completely different ways of thinking about money, personified by the rich dad and the poor dad.
The book contrasts these two father figures. The poor dad is the author's actual father, a very educated guy, but he always struggled with money. The rich dad is his best friend's father, who was a super successful entrepreneur. And their advice? It was worlds apart. Poor dad would say, go work for a good company. Rich dad would say, own the company. This huge difference in mindset is really the heart of the whole book. And that's the fundamental difference right there. Poor dad's advice trains you to be a really good employee. Rich dad's advice, on the other hand, pushes you to become an owner, someone who hires good employees. It's a massive shift from working for the system to owning the system itself. This brings us to a really crucial point. It's not just about getting different advice. It's about realizing that the rich are playing a completely different game with a completely different set of rules. Okay, let's take a scenario we see in the news all the time. A huge corporation announces they're laying off thousands of employees to cut costs. Now, how does that one event look from two totally different points of view? For the employee, it's a catastrophe. Their livelihood is gone, just like that. But what about for the owner or the big investors? Well, the stock market often loves that kind of news. The stock price shoots up, and they actually get richer. It's the exact same event, but it creates two totally opposite outcomes, depending on which side of the table you're sitting on. So, the real takeaway from Rich Dad, Poor Dad is this. Escaping the rat race isn't about working harder at your 9-to-5. It's about getting a different kind of education altogether, what he calls financial literacy. It's about finally learning the rules of the money game that owners and investors have known all along, but that they never ever teach in school. And that's really the final, challenging thought the book leaves us with. Financial freedom isn't some accident or a matter of luck. It's a choice. But you can't make that choice unless you learn a completely new set of rules, the same rules the wealthy have been passing down for generations. So the only question left is, isn't it time you learned them too?
All right, let's just jump right in. We all have a kind of financial blueprint in our heads, right? A set of rules we follow about money. But have you ever stopped to think about where that blueprint actually came from? Today, we're going to explore one of the most famous stories about this very idea. A tale of two dads, two totally different ways of thinking, and the battle for one kid's financial future.
Now this is a big one. I'm sure you've heard this before. This was the core belief of one of the author's mentors, his own biological father. The idea is that money is this corrupting force, something to be careful with, maybe even something you should feel a little guilty for wanting. And then, bam, the script gets flipped completely. This was the view from the author's other mentor. It's a pretty jarring statement, isn't it? It argues that no, it's poverty, it's the financial struggle, that's the real source of misery and desperation in the world.
So, which one is it? Is money the problem, or is the lack of it the problem? This is the central conflict, the choice that the author, Robert Kiyosaki, was staring down as just a young boy.
You see, Kiyosaki had this really unique upbringing where he was guided by two father figures. One was his actual dad, who he calls Poor Dad, and the other was his best friend's father, the Rich Dad. Now, both of these guys were successful, they were hardworking, but the advice they gave and where they ended up financially couldn't have been more different. Okay, this is where it gets really fascinating. Look at the paradox here. On one side, you've got Poor Dad, a brilliant academic, a PhD who made good money but struggled with it his entire life and died leaving behind bills. And on the other side, Rich Dad, an 8th grade dropout who became one of the wealthiest men in Hawaii and left a massive fortune. So the big takeaway here is it wasn't about grades and it wasn't even about income. It was something else entirely.
And that something else? Well, it was their mindset. The real difference between them wasn't in their wallets, it was in their heads, how they thought, what they believed, and the actual words they used when they talked about money.
Poor Dad's thinking was often built around statements that were basically mental dead ends.
There were conversation killers, idea killers. They just shut his brain down to any other possibility.
And this was his #1 catchphrase: I can't afford it. It's just a statement of fact, right? An endpoint. There's nowhere else to go. The brain hears that, goes, okay, guess not, and the problem solving just stops cold.
Rich Dad, on the other hand, he pretty much forbade those words. His mindset was built around questions. Questions that were like a starting pistol for the brain, forcing it to get up and start running, looking for answers.
You see the difference? That tiny little shift from I can't to how can I? It changes everything. It opens your mind up, it kicks your problem-solving skills into gear, and it starts the hunt for a solution. It's basically an invitation to think.
Rich Dad actually had a name for this. He called the automatic "I can't afford it" a form of mental laziness. He said your financial mind is like a muscle. Saying "I can't" is like choosing not to even try lifting the weight, but asking "How can I?" Well, that's the workout. That's the rep that makes the muscle stronger and grows your ability to create wealth.
And here's where you see how their words literally became their reality. Poor Dad always said, I'll never be rich, and, well, he was right. Rich Dad, on the other hand, even after huge financial losses when he was totally broke, would still say, I'm a rich man. For him, it was his identity, not just some number in his bank account.
And this was his logic, which is just brilliant. For Rich Dad, being broke was a temporary situation. It was a cash flow problem. But being poor, that was a permanent mindset, a state of hopelessness. See, one is just a circumstance. The other is who you are.
So you can see how this stuff wasn't just about small phrases. These opposing mindsets created two completely different blueprints for how to live your life, how to approach your career, risk, and even how to think about your own family. I mean, just look at the contrast. It's night and day. Career advice? Poor Dad says work for a company, Rich Dad says buy the company. Risk? Poor Dad says avoid it, Rich Dad says learn to manage it. Even their own kids became a dividing line. For Poor Dad, his kids were the excuse for why he wasn't rich. For Rich Dad, they were his motivation, the reason he had to be rich. An excuse versus a reason. Wow. So here's this young kid, stuck in the middle of these two completely different paths. He couldn't follow both. He had to make a choice. He had to decide which dad's advice was going to be the foundation for the rest of his life. And get this, he made that choice at just 9 years old. Think about that for a second. At 9. At an age when most of us are worried about cartoons and learning multiplication, he was making a decision that would set the entire financial course of his life.
Years later, he'd realized that this huge moment in his life was perfectly captured in one of the most famous poems ever written. A poem all about the choices we make and where they lead us.
He chose Rich Dad's path. He took the unconventional road, the riskier one, the one less traveled by. He chose financial education and entrepreneurship over the well-worn path of just getting a safe job. And just like the poem says, man, that made all the difference.
So after this whole story, what's the one big thing to take away? What's the ultimate lesson from this tale of two dads? It's not just about changing your vocabulary. It's about getting your hands on the single most powerful asset you could ever possibly own.
And here it is. The ultimate lesson is that financial education is way more powerful than money itself. Think about it. Money can be lost, jobs can disappear, markets can crash, but the knowledge of how money actually works, that gives you power over it. It lets you build wealth from scratch, again and again if you have to.
And that education, it wasn't just random tips. It was distilled into 6 core lessons that Rich Dad taught over 30 years, and they cover the whole shebang, from why the rich don't really work for a paycheck to the power of corporations and the huge idea of working to learn, not just working to earn.
Which brings us right back to the beginning and right back to you. We all have a rich dad and a poor dad voice in our heads, voices of fear and voices of possibility. Advice we've picked up from our family, from school, from everywhere. The most important part of this whole story is that you get to choose which one you listen to. So take a second and ask yourself, which dad is giving you your financial advice?
All right, let's dive into one of the biggest lessons from a book that has changed how millions of people think about money, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And you know, it all kicks off not with some complex financial strategy, but with a childhood memory that, well, it changed everything. So picture this. It's 1956. Our narrator is just a 9-year-old kid in a small sugar plantation town. And because of how the school districts were drawn up, he ends up going to school with all the rich kids. And it's here, for the very first time, he feels that sharp, uncomfortable sting of being poor. And this is the moment that lights the fuse. A friend is having a party at his family's beach house, but our narrator and his best friend Mike, they don't get an invite. Why? They're told flat out, it's because they're the poor kids. Ouch. That one sentence, that feeling of being left out, it just sparks this fire inside him. So he goes home and asks his dad, a really smart, highly educated man we'll get to know as Poor Dad, this huge, life-changing question. But his dad, who's a teacher, he doesn't really have an answer. All he can come up with is, well, use your head, son. And that's it. That's the only advice he gets. So what do two 9-year-old boys do with advice like, use your head to make money? Well, they take it literally, of course. They decide if they're going to make money, they're going to make money. I mean, you have to give them credit for ingenuity here. Their plan was pretty detailed. They went around the neighborhood collecting old toothpaste tubes. Back then, they were made of lead. They'd melt them down in a coffee can, pour the hot lead into plaster molds they'd made, and boom, they had their very own nickel production line going in the driveway. Of course, the business didn't last long. His dad comes home, sees the whole operation, and has to sit them down and gently explain this little concept called counterfeiting. So yeah, their dream of literally printing or melting money was dead on arrival. It was illegal. But here's the thing. His dad isn't mad. He's actually proud of them for taking action. He gives them this incredible piece of encouragement and then says something that changes everything. If you really want to learn about money, go talk to Mike's dad. And this is where we finally meet Rich Dad. He's Mike's father, a super busy guy who's quietly building a business empire. He agrees to teach the boys, but his teaching style is, let's just say, it's a little different. And right here, you see the massive difference between these two men. Poor Dad preached the path we all know. Study hard, get a safe job, climb the ladder. Rich Dad's offer was totally different. It was hands-on. The work itself would be the lesson. No lectures, just real life. Take it or leave it. And here was the kicker. The pay for this real-world MBA? A measly 10 cents an hour. I mean, even for 1956, that was basically nothing. But they were so hungry to learn, they took the deal. So what was this amazing job? Well, it was anything but glamorous. For 3 hours every single Saturday, their job was to dust the canned goods in one of Rich Dad's stores. That's it. Just dusting cans. And week after week, it was the same soul-crushing routine. 3 hours of work for 30 cents. And the whole time, Rich Dad was nowhere in sight. He hadn't taught them a single thing. And the anger, it was starting to build. Think about it. After a whole morning of work, their entire paycheck could buy them, 3 comic books? They felt like they were being totally used, like slaves working for pennies. The whole thing felt completely pointless. And finally, he just snaps. He tells Mike, I'm done, I'm quitting. And that's when he realizes the truth. Mike tells him his dad was expecting this all along. He was waiting for him to get angry. The frustration wasn't a side effect of the lesson, it was the lesson. So he storms in to confront Rich Dad, ready to demand a raise and some respect. But after their talk, Rich Dad comes back with an offer that is just insane. He says, good, now get back to work. Only this time, I'm not going to pay you anything. 0. And right here, this is the moment the light bulb finally goes on. Rich Dad sits them down and explains exactly why he put them through all that frustration. He was giving them a concentrated dose of real life to show them one of the biggest traps people fall into. And here it is, lesson number 1. This is the fundamental mindset shift that separates the rich from everybody else. Most of us spend our lives working for a paycheck. The rich, on the other hand, build systems so that their money is the thing doing all the work. Rich Dad calls this endless cycle of chasing paychecks the rat race. You know the drill. Get up, go to work, pay the bills, repeat. It's a life driven not by conscious thought, but by 2 very powerful emotions. Just think about it, right? It's the fear of not having money that gets you out of bed and to a job you might not even like. Then, once you get paid, it's desire, or maybe greed, for all the nice things you can buy that kicks in. Most people just react to these feelings, thinking that a bigger paycheck is the answer, but it's really just a short-term fix for a long-term problem. So by taking away their 10-cent an hour paycheck, Rich Dad was forcing the boys to stop thinking like employees. He wanted them to open their eyes and see the opportunities that, believe it or not, were right there in front of them the whole time. And once their minds were free from chasing pennies, they came up with an absolutely brilliant idea. They noticed that the convenience store manager would rip the covers off old comic books to return them for credit and then just throw the rest away. So they asked, "Hey, can we have those?" The manager said sure. So they started a comic book library in an empty room and charged the neighborhood kids 10 cents admission to come in and read for hours. And the results? They were absolutely mind-blowing. That little library started pulling in an average of $9.50 a week. They even hired Mike's sister to run it for them. They had created a real asset, a business that made money for them even when they weren't there. Their money was finally working for them. And this, right here, was Rich Dad's entire point. The moment they stopped obsessing about a paycheck, their minds opened up. They started seeing value where everyone else just saw trash. And that, he explained, is the very first step to breaking out of the rat race. So it all comes down to this question for us. When you think about your own finances, what's really in the driver's seat? Are you just reacting to the fear of not having enough and the desire for more? Or are you consciously choosing your thoughts and looking for those opportunities that are hiding in plain sight?
Today, we are going to break down the single most important rule from one of the most legendary finance books ever written, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And believe it or not, it all starts by questioning the one thing we're all taught to go after.
You know, we're all sort of programmed to chase a bigger paycheck, right? But what if that's completely the wrong goal? The whole point of this book is that high income doesn't just fail to create wealth. Without the right foundation, it can actually make you go broke faster.
To see what I mean, check out this incredible story from 1923. Picture this, a group of the world's most successful businessmen. I'm talking titans of industry. They all meet in Chicago. These guys controlled just immense wealth. But get this, just 25 years later, their fortunes were completely gone. They ended up broke, in prison, or even worse. It's a terrifying thought, right? It proves that making money and keeping money are two totally different ballgames.
And look, this isn't just some old story from history. You see it play out all the time, right? Lottery winners or pro athletes who go from being millionaires to totally bankrupt in just a few years. It just hammers home the book's central warning. Money without financial intelligence is like trying to hold water in a sieve. So, earning it isn't the problem. It's the weak foundation underneath.
The book uses this amazing analogy. If you want to build a simple little house, a small concrete slab is all you need. But if you want to build the Empire State Building of wealth, whoa, you've got to dig a deep, powerful foundation first. And here's the kicker. That foundation isn't money. It's financial literacy. So, what does that foundation actually look like? Well, it all boils down to just a single rule. A rule that's so simple, the book claims, that most people just completely miss it.
So you want to know what it is? What's the one thing that truly separates the wealthy from everyone else? Okay, here it is. Rule number 1. You must know the difference between an asset and a liability. And buy assets. That's it. That's the entire game plan. I know, it sounds almost insultingly simple, right? But the real secret isn't in the rule itself. It's in how we define those two little words.
And this is where it gets really interesting. Most of us think we know what an asset is, but the book totally redefines these terms in a radically simple way. Forget all the complicated accounting jargon, it all comes down to just one thing: cash flow.
It's really this simple. An asset puts money in your pocket. A liability takes money out of your pocket. That is the entire definition. The only thing that matters is which way the cash is flowing. So an asset, like a rental property, stocks, or a business you own, it's like a little money-making machine that works for you. It generates income that flows right into your pocket, whether you show up to your job or not.
And on the flip side, you have liabilities. A liability is constantly pulling money out of your pocket through your expenses. Think about car payments, loans, credit card debt. It's just a constant drain on your money.
All right, so here comes the most controversial idea in the entire book. Using this super strict cash flow definition, is your home, the place you live in, an asset or a liability?
The book's answer is a hard no. For most people, your main home is your biggest liability. Why? Well, every single month it takes money out of your pocket for the mortgage, taxes, insurance, and all the repairs. All that money is just trapped, sitting there, instead of being invested in things that could actually make you more money. And this one idea completely shatters the biggest myth of the middle class.
So once you really get this new definition, you start to see these really clear patterns in how people handle their money. And these patterns are what ultimately decide whether you end up poor, middle class, or wealthy.
Okay, so first you have the cash flow of the poor. Income comes in from a job, and it flows right back out to cover expenses like rent and food. Then you have the middle class. They earn more, but they funnel that income into liabilities they think are assets. You know, the house, the car payment. This is what traps them in the rat race. But the wealthy, they do something completely different. They use their income to buy assets. And those assets then generate more income, creating this amazing self-perpetuating cycle of wealth.
And this leads to the final, kind of mind-bending idea. If wealth isn't a big salary or a fancy house, then what is it? The book argues it's not a dollar amount at all. It's a measure of time.
The book actually uses this definition from the inventor Buckminster Fuller. Wealth is your ability to survive. So ask yourself this. If you stopped working today, how long could you live off the money you have? That number of days, that is your true wealth. The goal isn't just to get rich, it's to become financially free.
And you can actually measure it. So let's say your assets bring in $1,000 a month, but your expenses are $2,000 a month. Well, your wealth is half a month. It's a real, tangible number. Financial freedom is achieved the moment your income from your assets is finally greater than your expenses.
It really all comes down to this one quote. The rich buy assets. The poor only have expenses. The middle class buys liabilities they think are assets. And you have to realize that's not just a summary, it's a choice. It makes you ask, which one of those paths are you on?
So the final question is for you. When you look at where your money goes each month, are you buying things that pay you, or are you buying things that you have to pay for? Because ultimately, you aren't just spending your money, you're spending your life.
All right, today we're going to unpack one of the most powerful and honestly one of the most misunderstood lessons from Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It's lesson 3, mind your own business. And trust me, this is one of those ideas that can totally flip how you think about your job, your money, and really your whole financial future. So what in the world does it actually mean to mind your own business? Let's get into it. To really get this, we've got to go back in time. Picture this. It's 1974. The founder of McDonald's, the legendary Ray Kroc, is talking to a class of super smart MBA students at the University of Texas. After his main speech, he grabs a beer with them, and he's about to drop a piece of wisdom that was worth more than their entire degree. So he looks at all these future business titans and asks them a really simple question. What business am I in? The students kind of laugh it off. I mean, it's a joke, right? It's obvious. So he asks them again. And of course, someone finally pipes up, Ray, who in the world doesn't know you're in the hamburger business? And hey, that's what we all think, isn't it? McDonald's is burgers and fries, plain and simple. But that was not the answer Ray Kroc was looking for. And then, bam, he hits him with this. Kroc told them his real business wasn't about selling hamburgers at all. It was about acquiring the real estate underneath every single golden arch. That was the actual engine of his massive wealth.
Now here's the absolute genius of it. While the franchise owners were busy flipping burgers, Kroc knew that the single most important factor for success was the location. So in reality, every time someone bought a franchise, they were also paying the mortgage on a prime piece of real estate for Ray Kroc, helping him build a global property empire, one street corner at a time. And just how well did that strategy work out? Well, get this. Today, McDonald's is the largest single owner of real estate on the entire planet. Think about that for a second. That's more than any other company, more than any government. It's huge. And it all came from that one simple, powerful idea. And that story right there is the perfect setup for what we're talking about today. The huge, and I mean huge, difference between your profession and your business. Getting this distinction right is absolutely crucial if you're serious about building wealth. So here it is, the big secret. Number 3, mind your own business. You know, so many financial struggles boil down to one simple thing. People spend their entire lives working their tails off for somebody else's business, and they never get around to building their own. The book lays it out perfectly with this example. You ask someone, hey, what's your business? And they say, oh, I'm a banker. Okay, cool. But then you ask, do you own the bank? And the answer is almost always, oh, no, I just work there. See, they've confused their job with their business.
So let's just break this down. Think of it like this. Your profession, your job, that's what generates your income. It's your paycheck. But your business, that's your asset column. That's the stuff you own that makes money for you, even when you're sleeping.
The trap that so many of us fall right into is that we become our job title. You know, we go to school to be a writer or a doctor or an engineer, and then we spend the next 40 years making the owner of the company or the hospital rich instead of focusing on building our own financial security. Okay, so how do we actually get out of this trap?
How do we start minding our own business? Well, it really boils down to doing one thing over and over again, deliberately and consistently building up that asset column.
Now, let's be super clear here. This is not about telling you to quit your job tomorrow. Absolutely not. The advice is to keep that day job, be a fantastic employee, get that income. But then you have to start using that money to buy real assets, not liabilities, not just more stuff that loses value.
So what even is a real asset? Well, we're talking about things like businesses that you own but don't have to physically be there to run. We're talking stocks, bonds, mutual funds, real estate that brings in rent checks every month. Maybe you get royalties from a book you wrote or a patent you own. Basically, it's anything that has value and puts money into your pocket, not takes it out. I absolutely love this quote. It completely reframes how you look at money, right? Every single dollar you put into your asset column is like hiring a tiny little employee that works for you 24/7, no breaks, and its only job is to make more money. The goal is to build a whole army of these dollar employees. Okay, and this all leads to the final piece of the puzzle, and it's a big one. It's a huge mindset shift that ties all of this together, and it's all about how you treat the nice things in life, the luxuries.
Here's the secret. The rich buy luxuries last. First, they focus all their energy on building up that asset column. Then, they wait until the cash flow, the money coming in from those assets, is strong enough to buy the luxury item for them. The asset buys the luxury, not their own paycheck. And this is the complete 180-degree opposite of how most people do it. We see a shiny new car, a fancy watch, an amazing vacation, and we buy it right away with our salary, or even worse, we put it on a credit card. All that does is dig us deeper into a financial hole.
There's this great story in the book about how the author's wife really wanted a new Mercedes. But instead of just going out and buying it, they waited for 4 years. They let their real estate investments grow and grow until the extra cash flow from their properties was enough to pay for the car. That Mercedes wasn't just a car, it was a trophy. It was a reward for being financially smart.
So, I want to leave you with this one question to think about. When you really look at your financial life, where your time, your energy, and your money are all going, are you spending it all to make someone else rich? Or are you, right now, taking the steps, even if they're small, to mind your own business and to build that asset column that will one day take care of you?
Okay, let's dive right into this. We're going to break down one of the most controversial ideas from Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And it's all about something we all deal with, taxes. But more importantly, how the rules of the tax game, well, they aren't exactly the same for everyone. So let me start by asking you a question that we all think we know the answer to. Is Robin Hood a hero? I mean, you know the story, right? Rob from the rich, give to the poor. It sounds noble for sure. But what if that very idea is actually the root of a huge financial problem for most of us? One that could be costing you literally hundreds of thousands of dollars over your lifetime. In the book, this is where things get really interesting. The author's rich dad didn't see Robin Hood as a hero at all. He saw this philosophy as a dangerous idea, one that has had massive, real-world consequences on our bank accounts today. So this isn't just some old story. It's the very foundation of our modern tax system. And here it is, the book's core argument laid out plain and simple. The whole idea of taxing the rich to help everyone else, it completely backfired. The real burden didn't end up on the rich, it landed squarely on the shoulders of the middle class. So you're probably wondering, how on earth did that happen? Well, to really get it, we need to do a quick rewind and look at the history of how income tax even became a thing in the first place. It's kind of wild, but income taxes weren't always a permanent part of life. They actually started out as temporary fixes. In both Britain and America, they were created to fund massive wars. The idea was simple. Everyone chips in for an emergency. But as you can see from this timeline, temporary has a funny way of becoming permanent. And here's the most important part, the political genius of it all. How do you get an entire country to agree to a permanent tax? Easy. You sell it with a very simple, very powerful promise. Don't worry, this tax is designed only to punish the rich. And guess what? It worked like a charm. The masses voted for it, and it became law. But then something predictable happened. The government's appetite for money just kept growing. And, as the book argues, to feed that hunger, the tax couldn't stay focused only on the rich. It had to expand, eventually trickling down to the very same people who had voted for it in the first place. Okay, so this whole history lesson really sets the stage for a deep split in how people think about money. And the author illustrates this perfectly through his two father figures, his poor dad, a highly educated employee, and his rich dad, an entrepreneur. Let's break this down, because it's absolutely key. The poor dad mindset is all about working hard inside the system and believing the rich should just pay more. The rich dad mindset, though, isn't about working harder. It's about understanding the system itself. He knew the wealthy wouldn't just sit there and pay more taxes. They would react, adapt, and use the law to their advantage. And the real-world result of that typical employee mindset? It's pretty staggering. The author claims that the average American works 5 to 6 months of the entire year just to cover their taxes. Think about that for a second. That's nearly half of your working life just to fund the government. So if the system was originally designed to tax the rich, but they're not the ones feeling the biggest squeeze, then how? How do they do it? What is the secret? This brings us to what the book calls the single biggest legal secret the rich use, the corporation. Now, it's so important to understand what a corporation really is. When you hear that word, you probably picture a giant skyscraper or a huge factory. But it's not. It's just a legal entity. Basically, a file folder with some legal documents inside. It's a tool, and it's a tool that's available to anyone, not just the super wealthy. And this simple tool offers two incredibly powerful benefits. First, major tax advantages, and second, protection from lawsuits. Now, that legal shield is great, but for right now, we're going to focus on the tax advantages, because understanding this is a total game changer. So here's the crucial point. You really got to get this. The real power of the corporation isn't about if you pay taxes. It's about when you pay them. This little shift in timing, well, it makes all the difference in the world. Now, check this out, because this table shows the entire game. As an employee, your cash flow is 1. You earn money. 2. You get taxed immediately. And 3. You try to live on what's left. But for a corporation owner, it's totally different. 1. The corporation earns money. 2. It spends money. And 3, it gets taxed only on what's left over. The order is completely flipped on its head, and that flip is where all the magic happens. So what does that pre-tax spending look like in the real world? Well, with the right legal setup, a lot of personal expenses can become legitimate business expenses. Vacations can be structured as board meetings. Your car payments, insurance, and repairs can be company expenses. Health club memberships, even most of your restaurant meals. All of this can be paid by the corporation before a single dollar of tax is calculated. Now, let's be crystal clear about something. This isn't about finding illegal loopholes or trying to evade taxes. It's about playing a much smarter game by increasing what the author calls your financial IQ. See, the rich outsmarted the whole tax the rich idea simply because they understood money and they understood the law. Two subjects that, let's be honest, are almost never taught in our traditional school system. The real advantage isn't having more money, it's having more knowledge. And that knowledge, that financial IQ, is built on 4 main pillars. First, accounting. You have to be able to read the numbers. Second, investing, the science of making your money make more money. Third, understanding markets, knowing the ins and outs of supply and demand. And finally, the law, knowing about the tax advantages and protections we've been talking about. It's the combination of all 4 of these that creates real financial power. And the impact of having this knowledge? It's absolutely massive. The author uses this powerful analogy. It's the difference between someone walking and someone flying. It's not just a tiny advantage, it fundamentally changes the speed at which you can build wealth. So, we're going to end on this final powerful thought. The traditional advice we all get, the poor dad advice, is to find a good company and spend your life climbing the corporate ladder. But the question Rich Dad poses completely reframes the entire goal. It asks, why spend your whole life just climbing the ladder when you could learn how to own it?
So what is it that really separates the wealthy from, well, everyone else? If you ask the folks behind Rich Dad, Poor Dad, it's not what you probably think. It's a certain mindset, a way of thinking that allows them to, and this is the crazy part, literally invent money. Today, we're going to break down exactly what that means.
And to really get this, we're going to look at two stories that happened on the exact same night. On one side of the screen, you have this audacious inventor who's about to change the world. And on the other, a manager, pleading for his job back. These two real-world examples, they set the stage for everything we're about to talk about.
All right, let's dive into story number one. It's about a young guy named Alexander Graham Bell. He had just patented his brand new invention, you might have heard of it, the telephone, and, demand was just exploding. He knew he needed to scale up, so he went to the biggest corporation of his day, Western Union, with an offer.
Now get this. Look at that number. Bell offered them the whole shebang, his patent, his little company, everything, for just $100,000. The president of Western Union basically laughed in his face, called the price ridiculous, and showed him the door. Well, the rest is history, right? Out of that one single rejection, the multi-billion-dollar company AT&T was born. Okay, so right after the TV program about Bell ended, the local news came on, and it was such a jarringly different story. A local company had just downsized, and there was this 45-year-old manager with his wife and two little kids right there with him, literally on camera, begging the security guards to let him talk to the owners. He just bought a house and was just terrified of losing it, and the camera just zoomed in on him pleading for the whole world to see.
So what is the real difference between Bell, the inventor, and that laid-off manager? You might think it's about education or smarts or technical knowledge, but it's not. It's something way deeper, something that holds all of us back to some degree: self-doubt. The minute we leave school, we find out pretty fast that it's not just about good grades. In the real world, you need guts, you need chutzpah, audacity, daring, tenacity, call it what you want. This kind of boldness is what ends up shaping our future way more than our report cards ever did. And this quote just hits the nail on the head. So often, it's not the smartest person in the room who gets ahead, it's the boldest. That feeling of excessive fear and self-doubt, it's the #1 killer of personal genius. We all know people who are brilliant, who know all the answers, but they just don't have the courage to act. So here's the crucial takeaway. Financial genius isn't just about knowing the numbers. That's only half the equation. It also requires courage, because if that fear is too strong, it completely smothers your genius. The whole point is to learn to take smart risks, to be bold, and to let your brilliant side turn that fear into power.
Okay, but why is this mindset so important right now? Well, because we are living through a period of change like nothing we've ever seen before. The old rules, they just don't apply anymore. And clinging to them is basically a recipe for getting left behind.
Just think about how the whole definition of wealth has changed over time. For centuries, if you had land, you were wealthy. Simple. Then along came the industrial age, and suddenly wealth was all about factories and production. But today, wealth is information. The person with the most up-to-date information has the real power.
And here's the kicker. Information moves at the speed of light. You can't put a fence around it like you could with land or a factory. This is the new reality. And when you see people struggling today, it's often because they are still clinging to those old ideas, not realizing that what was a valuable asset yesterday is totally gone today. Their old ideas have become their single biggest liability.
To really bring this home, let's look at this fantastic example from the book, a board game called Cash Flow. Now, it was designed to teach people how money works, but what it really does is act like a mirror. It reflects your own financial habits right back at you. So this woman, recently divorced and kinda searching for answers, sits down to play. Pretty early on, she draws a card for a boat, and she's thrilled. But as she starts trying to work through the numbers on her balance sheet, she gets more and more frustrated. It slowly dawns on her that this boat isn't an asset making her money, it's a doodad, a massive financial drain taking money out of her pocket. Her game just tanks from there, and by the end, she's furious, insisting that some silly game could not possibly have anything to say about her real life.
But that's the genius of it. The game is an instant feedback system. See, there's no teacher standing at the front of the room lecturing you. Instead, the game itself is feeding you a personalized lecture, one that's custom-made just for you to show you what you don't know, and exactly how you act with money.
And get this, there's a follow-up to the story. The woman called back later and admitted that her anger wasn't really about the game. It was about embarrassment. She realized the game was spot on. For 20 years of her marriage, she and her husband hadn't been buying assets. They'd been racking up a ton of doodads. Her frustration with the numbers, that was just embarrassment that she didn't really understand them.
So this brings us to our final, and honestly, our most important section. Because the lesson from that board game, it isn't really about the game at all. It's about how we can look at the real world every single day. You see, just like that board game, the world is constantly giving us feedback about our choices, especially our financial ones. The real question is, are we actually listening? Or are we reacting with anger, with denial, blaming the game of life instead of looking at our own moves? If we just tuned in a little more, we could learn so much. So why should you even bother with all this? Why develop your financial IQ? Why learn to be bold and take risks? Well, the ultimate purpose might not be what you think. It's actually not just about getting rich.
The goal is this simple: to have more options. That's it. This is really the heart of inventing money. It's not magic, it's about creating new opportunities for yourself. In a world that's always changing, with layoffs and downsizing, having a high financial IQ gives you the freedom, the flexibility to handle whatever life throws your way. It's about being ready to welcome change instead of dreading it.
And that leaves us with one final thought to really chew on. We all have this incredible potential inside of us, right? A personal genius. So the real question you've got to ask yourself is this: right now, in your life, is your genius being suppressed by your fear?
You know, are you amazing at what you do, but you feel like your paycheck just doesn't quite match your talent? We're always told to specialize, right? To become the absolute best at our one thing. But what if I told you that's the very thing holding you back? Today we're going to dig into this really powerful, kind of backwards idea from Rich Dad, Poor Dad, that the real secret to wealth isn't just about being good at your job, it's about mastering the skills around it.
So this quote, it's actually the punchline to a fantastic story. So picture this. Robert Kiyosaki is in Singapore, and he's being interviewed by this young, super ambitious reporter. And she is a brilliant writer, truly gifted with words. Her big dream? To become a best-selling author. But here's the problem. She was totally and completely stuck.
On paper, she had it all. A master's degree in English Lit, a writing style that, by all accounts, was just incredible. Anybody who read her stuff was just blown away. But, despite all that talent and all that praise, her career was just going nowhere. Crickets.
So, finally, in this moment of frustration, she just asked Kiyosaki for some advice. And what he said next? Well, let's just say it wasn't what she was expecting. In fact, she was actually insulted by it.
His advice? Go learn how to sell. You can just imagine, she was floored. Here she is, a professional, a woman with a master's degree. And this guy is telling her to become a salesperson, a job she completely looked down on, filled with people she thought were just greedy and only cared about money.
And this is where the light bulb moment happens. Kiyosaki literally points to his own book on the table and says, look at this. It says best-selling author, not best writing author. He came right out and admitted that she was a much better writer than he was, but he had a skill she was missing. He knew how to sell.
And her story just perfectly illustrates this massive idea. What if you, and millions of other incredibly talented people out there, are just one single skill away from a huge breakthrough? We see this everywhere, don't we? You got brilliant mechanics who are basically wizards with engines, or highly educated doctors and lawyers who are somehow still struggling to make ends meet. It just goes to show you, raw talent by itself is often not enough. And the numbers really tell the story here. It's kind of shocking when you stop to think about it. Less than 5% of Americans earn over $100,000 a year. And that's not because 95% of people aren't talented or educated. Nope, it's because of something else.
In fact, there's a name for this whole concept. One skill away from great wealth. The idea is that your main talent, your core skill, that gets you in the game. But mastering that one extra skill, usually a business skill, that's what makes your income just explode. Okay, so this all leads to a really fundamental clash in philosophies about how to build a career. And Kiyosaki lays it out perfectly with his poor dad, the specialist, and his rich dad, the generalist. It really comes down to two totally different mindsets. Poor dad's whole philosophy was about job security through specialization. Dig one deep hole, study more and more about less and less. But rich dad, he had the exact opposite view. He said learning is everything. It's better to know a little bit about a lot of different things. And Kiyosaki himself is the perfect example of this. He totally lived by his rich dad's advice, choosing jobs for the skills they'd teach him, not for the paycheck. He learned about international trade in the Merchant Marines, leadership in the Marine Corps, and then, and this is the big one, he took a sales job at Xerox specifically to get over his fear of rejection. Every single career move was a strategic lesson.
So if it's not about being the best at just one thing, what's the secret? Well, let's use a simple analogy that makes this crystal clear.
Think about this for a second. How many of you listening right now could honestly cook a better hamburger than McDonald's? Yeah, pretty much everybody, right? I'm positive I could. And that, of course, leads to the billion-dollar question. If almost all of us can make a better product, then why is McDonald's the one making all the money?
The answer is so simple, it's brilliant. They are masters of business systems. They're not successful because they have the best hamburger in the world. They're successful because they have the best system for selling and delivering a perfectly average hamburger.
And this is the trap. This is where so many talented people get stuck. They focus all their time and energy on perfecting their hamburger, their craft, their product, their service, but they know next to nothing about the systems you need to actually sell it and get it to people. Which brings us to the final, and probably the most important takeaway from all of this. It's about completely changing the way we think about our jobs. You've probably heard this old saying before, right? That JOB stands for just over broke. And, well, there's a painful amount of truth to it. When we only focus on the paycheck, we get stuck on this hamster wheel, working our butts off just to pay bills, but never really getting ahead. So, here's the big piece of advice, especially if you're younger or just starting out. It's this: seek out work for what you will learn, even more than for what you will earn. Before you take any job, you have to ask yourself, what skills will I learn here that are going to make me more valuable 5 years from now? Always prioritize learning over earning, because those skills, they're going to pay you back way more than a slightly bigger paycheck ever could. So what skills should you be looking for? Well, it really boils down to these key areas. You got to understand how money works, that's cash flow. You need to understand how operations work, that's systems. And you need to know how to lead, that's people. But the one skill that ties it all together, the one that's like the engine for everything else, it's sales and marketing. Because selling, it's not about being some pushy, sleazy salesperson. It's just communication. Can you write in a way that persuades people? Can you speak in a way that gets them excited? Can you negotiate a good deal? And maybe the biggest one of all, can you get told no and not let it completely crush you? If you can master these things, you have the foundation for success in pretty much anything. So I'll just leave you with this question. The next time you're thinking about your job, look past the paycheck for a second. Ask yourself the hard question. Sure, this job is paying the bills for today, but is it building the skills for my tomorrow? The answer to that question just might change everything for you.
All right, let's dive into a huge question from Rich Dad Poor Dad. What is really stopping people from building wealth? And here's a spoiler. It's probably not what you think. It's not about the numbers. It's about these 5 major mental roadblocks. So let's break them down. So, you've done your homework, right? You've read the books, you get the concepts, you've maybe even mapped out a plan. And yet, the wealth isn't really building. What is the deal? It's this super frustrating paradox that so many people find themselves stuck in. And here's the thing. It really boils down to this. The biggest walls standing between you and wealth, they're not in your bank account. They're inside your own head. This isn't about some complex Wall Street formula. It's about getting over the psychological hurdles that are holding you back. So what are these hurdles? Well, today we're going to break down the big 5. We've got fear, cynicism, laziness and bad habits, those two go together, and finally, arrogance. First things first, we've got to look beyond the spreadsheets and the finance blogs and get to the real roadblocks on the path to freedom. Let's kick things off with the big one, the one that gets almost everybody, fear. And more specifically, the paralyzing fear of losing money. Look, everybody feels it, even the richest people on the planet.
The real difference isn't whether you feel the fear, it's what you do when you feel it.
I love this quote because it just flips the whole idea of loss on its head. Get this, losing money isn't a sign you're failing. In the world of investing, it's practically a rite of passage. It's just part of the game.
And this right here, this is the absolute core difference. Most people are so terrified of losing that their whole money strategy is defensive. They're playing not to lose. But winners, they play to win. Yeah, they hate losing. Nobody likes it, but they aren't afraid of it. They know every failure is a lesson that makes them tougher and smarter.
So how do you actually get into that winner's headspace? Well, Rich Dad had this really simple and kind of memorable piece of advice. Think like a Texan. It's all about how you frame risk, reward, and yep, failure. Now, this doesn't mean just go be reckless, right? It's a philosophy. It says it's way better to fail spectacularly chasing a massive dream than to nickel and dime your way to a small, quiet failure. It's about swinging for the fences instead of just trying not to strike out. I mean, think about the Alamo, for example. Historically, a huge loss, a total disaster. But Texans don't hide from it. They turn it into this incredible rallying cry. They're inspired by it. And that's the mindset you need. You've got to transform your losses into fuel. Because if you don't, that fear can turn into something even worse. So what happens when you let that fear just sit there and fester? It morphs into something even more poisonous. Cynicism. That's that little Chicken Little voice in your head, the one that's always screaming, "The sky is falling!" on every single one of your financial ideas.
You know, cynicism is really just your fear and doubt going completely wild. It freezes you in your tracks with an endless list of what ifs. What if the market crashes? What if the tenant doesn't pay? What if, what if, what if? All that noise, as some investors call it, keeps you stuck on the sidelines while amazing opportunities just walk right on by. Okay, check out this real-world story of how expensive cynicism can be. A friend found this killer deal on a property, a total bargain. But then he listened to the noise. He listened to a cynical neighbor who wasn't even an investor, by the way, and he got scared and backed out. That single decision cost him over 50 grand in pure profit, and more importantly, a huge first step towards his freedom. And this is where the rubber meets the road. Instead of just criticizing everything from the cheap seats like a cynic, winners get in the game and they analyze. They dig in, they look for solutions, and they find the opportunities that all that noise was trying to scare them away from. This is a perfect example. A cynic says, "Oh, I don't want to buy rental properties because I don't want to have to fix toilets." They fixate on this tiny little problem and let it kill a life-changing opportunity. But a winner analyzes. They ask, "Okay, how can I own this great asset without dealing with toilets?" And the answer is obvious. You hire a property manager. See? Analysis opens doors that criticism slams shut. All right, let's move on to a pair of obstacles that are basically best friends: laziness and bad habits. Now, we're not just talking about being a couch potato. The sneakiest, most dangerous kind of laziness is just being too busy to deal with your wealth. You know, Rich Dad taught that the 4 words, "I can't afford it," are a mental shutdown. As soon as you say them, your brain just stops working. But when you ask the question, "How can I afford it?" bam, it's like flipping a switch. Your brain is forced to open up, to get creative, and to start finding solutions. It's a tiny shift in language that changes absolutely everything. So what's the cure for this kind of "I'm too busy" laziness? Believe it or not, a little bit of greed. Now, not the evil movie villain kind of greed. We're talking about the healthy desire for a better, richer, fuller life. Ask yourself that radio station question. WIFM, what's in it for me? Imagine what your life would be like if you didn't have to worry about work. That desire, that's the rocket fuel you need to get over your own apathy. Now, this leads us straight into habits. And I've got a question for you. It's the end of the month, the bills are piling up, money's a little tight. Who do you pay first? Most of us were taught to pay our bills first, right? Well, what if that's exactly the wrong way to do it? The rule is actually super simple. Pay yourself first. You put money into your asset column before you pay anyone else. I know, it sounds totally backwards, right? But here is the secret genius of it. The pressure you feel from your creditors, that becomes your greatest motivation. It forces you, it literally forces you to get creative, to hustle, to find new ways to make money. It's like a workout for your financial muscles. The pressure makes you stronger. Okay, on to our final and maybe the most dangerous obstacle of them all: arrogance.
This is that sneaky little mindset that convinces you that you already know everything you need to know.
I love this definition. Think of it like a simple math formula. Arrogance is just your ego plus your ignorance. It's what happens when your ego tries to hide what you don't know by pretending it's not important. And let me tell you, in the world of money and investing, what you don't know can be very, very expensive.
And that brings us full circle, doesn't it? Whether we're talking about fear, cynicism, laziness, bad habits, or arrogance, every single one of these obstacles is really about one thing: your attitude towards failure. The biggest secret of winners isn't that they never fail. It's that they let failure inspire them. They're not scared of losing because they know, deep down, that every loss just makes them smarter and brings them one step closer to a huge win. So we've laid it all out. You know the obstacles, you know what's been holding people back. Now, you are going to face failure at some point. That's not a possibility, it's a guarantee. The only real question left is, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to let it be an excuse to quit? Or are you going to let it be your fuel to win? The ball's in your court. Have you ever felt like there's a secret language to money that you just weren't taught? Well, today we're going to crack that code. We are diving deep into the core ideas from Rich Dad, Poor Dad to unpack 10 really powerful steps designed to wake up that financial genius that's hiding inside all of us. So let's dive in.
Okay, this idea right here, it's the foundation for everything else we're about to talk about. The whole point is that opportunity isn't some rare thing you have to hunt down. It's all around us. The problem is our ability to even recognize it. That's a huge mindset shift, right? Stop searching for gold and start training your eyes to see it.
So why don't more of us see this gold? Well, the book suggests that a staggering 90% of people in the Western world are basically programmed in a way that keeps them from seeing these opportunities. 90%. That's a lot. And that, right there, is the real issue. See, it's not that we aren't smart enough. It's that for most of us, our financial genius has been, well, put to sleep by our education and our culture. And this whole breakdown is about being the alarm clock.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to talk about waking up that genius. Then we'll get into mastering your inner game, your mindset. After that, it's all about building your team and locking in those wealth-building habits. And we'll wrap up with a final principle that might surprise you: the power of giving.
So let's get started. Time to wake up that financial genius. First things first. Before you can ever hope to master money, you have to master what's going on up here, in your own head. This is all about your mindset, not the nitty-gritty mechanics. Your psychology, your reasons, your choices, your heroes, that's way more important than the technical stuff. So step one is you've got to find a reason that is bigger than any obstacle. Look, the road to financial freedom, it's long, it's tough. Just being kind of interested isn't going to cut it. You need a deep emotional why that is so powerful it can pull you through any setback. So what does that look like in real life? Well, it's a mix of what you're running from and what you're running to. The don't wants, like the fear of being stuck in a job forever, that's the fuel. But the wants, like the dream of total freedom and control over your life, that's the destination. You need both. Next up is the power of choice. Every single day, with every single dollar that passes through your hands, you are literally casting a vote for the person you want to become. Are you voting to be rich, poor, or middle class? It's not about one huge decision, it's about thousands of tiny ones. And this visualizes those choices perfectly. The book points out that about 90% of people choose to spend their extra money on things like TVs, entertainment. Only about 10% choose to invest that same money in their own financial education. That one little habit, that's a massive difference over a lifetime. And the last piece of the mindset puzzle is to find heroes. Learning about money doesn't have to feel like homework. If you study successful investors, you can basically tap into their genius. Heroes don't just inspire you. They make these huge, complicated goals feel possible. And that's a really powerful motivator. Okay, so once you've started to get your mindset right, the next big step is to build your team. It's time to get intentional about the people and the information you surround yourself with. Because let me tell you, your environment is everything. And this means asking a kind of tough question. Think about your close friends, your inner circle. What do you guys talk about? Are your conversations about creating wealth and opportunities, or something else? The whole idea here is that the people you hang out with directly shape your financial future. And this just lays it out so clearly, right? On one side, you've got friends who are focused on building wealth. They talk about money, business, investing, like they're interesting puzzles to solve. On the other side, you've got friends who are struggling. And often, for them, those topics are rude or stressful. The conversations you're in all the time literally become the thoughts in your head. So here's the bottom line. You have to be so careful who you take advice from. The book gives this really strong warning to avoid the chicken littles, the people who are always screaming that the sky's falling and telling you why every new idea is doomed to fail. Fear is contagious, but you know what? So is confidence. You get to choose. Now, a huge part of your team is actually paying for real expertise. A great broker or a sharp accountant isn't just an expense. They are an investment. Their knowledge should literally make you more money than you pay them. Think of them as your eyes and ears, giving you access to information that's priceless. Mindset, check. Team, check. All right, now it is time for action. This is where we stop thinking and start doing by creating disciplined habits that you can repeat over and over again. And the absolute foundation for all of this, the one thing that holds it all together, it's self-discipline. Without it, none of the other stuff works. It's the core skill that lets you actually execute on the single most important wealth-building habit of all, which is this simple concept: pay yourself first. Just look at the difference in cash flow here. On the left, the very first thing that happens when you get paid is money goes into your asset column before any bills are paid. Then those assets start making money to pay your expenses. On the right is what most people do: pay all the bills first and then hope something's left for assets. And let's be honest, there's almost never anything left. Okay, but this is where it gets a little intense. What happens if you pay yourself first and you don't have enough left for the bills? The book's advice is pretty radical. Do not touch your savings. Instead, you use the pressure of those bills and those creditors to force your brain to get creative and figure out new ways to make more money. It's like a workout for your financial genius. And here's a brilliant way to use that consumer desire we all have. So you want that new luxury car, right? The common path is to just get a loan, a liability. The rich dad way is different. You use that desire for the car to motivate you to go out and build a new asset. Then you let the cash flow from that asset buy the car for you. Your assets buy your luxuries, not your paycheck. And that brings us to our final section. And honestly, this might be the most counterintuitive and maybe the most powerful idea of them all. This is the secret that really ties it all together. And here it is, the principle of giving. The idea is that whenever you feel like you're lacking something, whether that's money, friendship, sales, whatever, the absolute fastest way to get it is to first give it away with no strings attached. If you want more money, give money. If you want to learn something, teach it to someone else. It's this universal law that generosity is what unlocks abundance. So we've covered the mindset, the team, the habits, and the secret power of giving. We've laid out the entire map. But knowledge is only potential power. The real question is, what are you going to do with it? Looking at everything we just talked about, what is the one single first step you're going to take starting today to awaken your own financial genius? So you've read Robert Kiyosaki's books. You get the philosophy. But you might be thinking, where's the actual to-do list? Well, that's exactly what we're breaking down here. We're turning his big ideas into a real, practical action plan for anyone who's ready to stop just thinking about wealth and actually start building it. First things first, you've got to ask yourself, are you a thinker or a doer? You see, according to Kiyosaki, some people get stuck in analysis paralysis, while others just act without a plan. The sweet spot is being both. And if you're ready to make that leap from thinking to doing, then you're in the right place. So, where do we start? Well, the very first action item is, believe it or not, to just stop. Seriously, hit pause on your daily grind and take a really honest look at what's working for you financially and, maybe more importantly, what just isn't. I mean, if you feel like you're working your tail off but not really getting anywhere, you might be stuck on a treadmill. And you know that old saying, right? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result? That's the definition of insanity. So to get a different result, you've got to break the cycle. You have to find a new way. Okay, so once you've hit pause on what's not working, it's time to find what will. This is the fun part. It's about going on the hunt for new formulas for success, brand new strategies and ideas that can totally change your financial game. So, how did Kiyosaki himself find a new formula? Well, he just walked into a bookstore and found a book on a really specific topic, the 16% solution, which is all about investing in something called tax lien certificates. Now, he knew absolutely nothing about it, but that was kind of the whole point. The first step is to just find an idea that's totally fresh to you. A book is a fantastic start, but let's be real, nothing beats real-world experience. So Kiyosaki found a government employee who was already successfully doing this stuff, investing in tax liens. And he didn't do anything complicated. He just took her to lunch and asked her how she did it. Simple as that. And check out the result. The total investment was maybe 1 day to read the book, another day to get things rolling, and 1 hour for lunch. And the outcome? He got himself an asset that was kicking off a 16% return. I mean, that's the incredible power of just combining a little bit of new knowledge with immediate action. So what this gives us is a simple, repeatable, 3-step formula. Number 1, go look for new ideas, whether it's in books or classes. 2, find someone who's already crushing it in that area. And 3, and this is absolutely the most important part, take action right away. Don't wait. Do it before you lose that momentum. All right, once you've got your new formula, it's time for the next big step. You have to actually get in the game. And in the world of investing, that means one thing: making offers. That's where all the learning and all the opportunities really happen. Now, most people are absolutely terrified of making an offer. They worry they'll be rejected or that it's rude. But Kiyosaki's advice here is a game changer. He says to think of it as a game. It's supposed to be fun. Just that one little shift in your mindset can get rid of almost all the fear. And hey, if you're still a little worried, here's a brilliant and kind of hilarious trick he uses. Always make your offers with an escape clause. His go-to is subject to the approval of my business partner. What nobody needs to know is that his business partner is his cat. It just goes to show you how easy it is to build in a safety net. This whole process isn't just about investing. It's pretty much the process for everything in life, right? Think about it. Dating, looking for a job, you name it. You search, you make an offer, you face some rejection, you negotiate, and then eventually you get an acceptance. Making offers is just a fundamental life skill. So once you're comfortable making offers, it's time to scale up your vision. And this next step is so important. You have to stop thinking small, because it's that small thinking that keeps most people from ever finding those really big, life-changing opportunities. Here is the huge trap that almost everyone falls into. We only look for what we think we can afford. But the moment you do that, you're filtering out like 99% of the real opportunities out there. The key isn't about finding more money. It's about changing what you're even looking for in the first place. So, how do you think bigger? Well, the strategy is pretty simple. Buy the whole pie, then sell off the pieces. For instance, let's say a friend of yours wants to buy a little piece of land. Instead of ignoring it, find a huge plot of land, get an option to buy it, and then sell your friend the piece he wanted. You can use his money to fund the whole deal, and you could end up keeping the rest of the land for free. And this isn't just theory. Here's a real-world example. Back in 1991, a friend took just $7,000 to buy a house. A few years later, the market got better, and he sold it for almost $80,000. Then he took that money and reinvested it into a mini warehouse, and by 1996, that asset was worth $330,000. That tiny initial investment just snowballed into a massive college fund, all because of financial intelligence. So when you put all these steps together, from finding new ideas to thinking bigger, it all points to one really powerful conclusion. You are in the driver's seat. Your financial future isn't decided by your paycheck or the economy. It's determined by the choices you make every single day. This quote right here is the absolute core of the entire philosophy. Wealth isn't really about the money you have, it's about the financial knowledge you've got. If you want more in your hands, you first have to get more in your head. Because at the end of the day, money is just an idea. Ultimately, it all comes down to this. Action always beats inaction. You have two gifts that are way more valuable than money, your mind and your time. The real question is, how are you going to invest them? And that leaves us with one final, very personal question. See, every single dollar that comes into your hands represents a choice. You can choose to be poor, you can choose to be middle class, or you can choose to be rich. So as you go about your day, think about this. With your very next dollar, what future are you going to choose?